think right now, with respect to rural broadband companies, who I primarily work with, is the salt typhoon attacks that have hit the larger companies, and now we're starting to see some of those filter down to the smaller companies. And the salt typhoon attacks are coming from China, and it's espionage related and looking to gather data on politicians, celebrities, whatnot, to use that data to gain intelligence, especially around around our military bases, what's happening with movements of the military. So we have a couple of things that the FCC is heavily involved in with the Ukraine, which China is involved in, and also, things that may be happening vis-a-vis Taiwan, and some other things going on in the Middle East. So that's very disconcerting that is being monitored and watched, and the infiltration is coming through these attacks that are originating through the CALEA process, which is the Communications Act for law enforcement agencies. And it appears that the FBI and others in the defense world are seeing these attacks coming through possibly the probes that are used to help law enforcement when they're trying to find criminals and bad guys. And it's all processes and procedures and equipment that are required by law for the rural telephone companies and broadband companies to have in place. So the fact that infiltration may be occurring through that there and getting in and then moving sideways from there is very disconcerting. Being very vigilant in monitoring, and see. I think a lot of people don't even know that it is in their systems. They're being told by the FBI that it's in there, and the FBI doesn't really have advice on how to remove it, how to locate it, or determine where it's going once it gets in there. So most of the smaller carriers or broadband companies or telecom companies are dependent on a third-party vendor that they trust to take care of this. So I think the best thing you can do is check with that third-party vendor whose services or equipment you may be using and see if they are aware of anything going on, if they have some sort of way of tracking through a VPN what's going on, whatever they are using to access your networks, and have that all checked and verified. From a legal standpoint, looking at the contracts you have with that vendor, with that third party, and making sure that you're pushing anything that happens that may be coming in because of what they've been doing is off of your backs and onto their backs, or there's some shared responsibility in that. Well, this may seem counterintuitive, but the first person that we recommend you call is your attorney who's been working with you, hopefully long term, to ensure that you are doing all the best practices, that you've developed your incident response plan, that you have a supply chain cyber incident plan, that you have a risk management plan in place. Your attorney who's worked with you on all of those processes and policies would be the first call. A lot of times the first call is made to the insurance carrier, but the problem with that is you don't know what you don't know yet. And with an attorney sitting on top of everything, you get the benefits of what's known as attorney-client privilege and the attorney work product doctrine, which is super, super helpful if there's some litigation fallout on the back end of an incident. So a lot of times we get that call. We've been working with our clients and a company that we use as our trusted cyber engineering services company. It happens to be called Cyber ESI, and they are hired by us to work with our clients. And as a result of that relationship, everything that they know about your network or any incident that you have is protected under our privilege, because we've hired them specifically thinking ahead to litigation fallout that may occur. So in that process, we've been working with our clients, some of them for over 10 years now, making sure that the processes, the procedures of when an incident occurs are all locked up and tidy. And I say that in the sense of a lot of companies use a lot of different third parties. You've got all kinds of different hands in the process, and you break the attorney-client privilege when third parties are involved. Now, if we didn't hire Cyber ESI and they were your vendor, the privilege wouldn't attach. So it's a special arrangement that we have from doing it this way and planning ahead. So I think the biggest thing is planning ahead, but also when you get that first call, you call your attorney, then everything that happens, even if you don't have a longstanding relationship and your attorney hasn't been involved, that you can try to capture some of that under attorney-client privilege. The attorney will then make the call to Cyber ESI, bring them in, and we'll start working the incident together. And a lot of times we find out that what we thought is an incident isn't an incident, and you've also avoided the problem of getting your insurance company involved too early. And sometimes you don't even have to involve the insurance company because you can realize, no, that wasn't what we thought it was. Everything's okay. There was no data breach. And we can go through the state data breach laws and the notifications and determine whether, each state law is different, whether under that state law a breach actually did occur. So it's very fact specific. But once the facts are let out, you can't pull them back in under attorney-client privilege. So that's why we think that's so important. That's not to say that we don't involve the insurance company down the road, because we do if there has been an incident and we need to get guidance from the insurance company on what they're willing to do in each specific incident, which again is very fact specific. So the value is, again, thinking ahead if there is an incident and data is lost or stolen, ransomed, whatever the particular facts are. There's usually notification processes at each state that you have to notify the state attorney general of the breach. You also have to notify all of your customers whose data might have been stolen, and you're going to put some things in place that will be credit monitoring services for those customers whose data is stolen, because you want to make sure that they have access to the ability to have that monitoring service to protect them in the event that their data is used nefariously. So oftentimes when you notify the Attorney General, there's a whole nother group of lawyers, plaintiffs' lawyers, that are sitting there waiting to see those notifications so that they can go out and find one of your customers. Usually they do this on Facebook in your community, and they offer up money, say $5,000, for them to be the representative in a class action lawsuit. And a lot of people are hard up for cash and be more than willing to take $5,000 to have their name thrown on a lawsuit against you. And so that's why we think it's really important to have that attorney-client privilege or the attorney work product doctrine, because anything that you did or didn't do that you should have done, and we know about it, we don't necessarily have to share that with the plaintiff's attorney if it's under attorney-client privilege, and we were counseling you about when to take certain actions, when not to take certain actions, when to beef up your network, because a lot of this has to do with money and how much you can afford to pay to get the perfect network. And the perfect network is always never going to be perfect a year from the time it was perfect. And so we see a lot of folks spending a lot of time doing the IT work, which it has to be done. And there's a lot of work to be done on that front and trying to protect the networks. But the hackers are more creative than the people trying to defend the networks. And so they're always going to try to find a way in, and they're usually successful at some point in breaking in, no matter what kind of security you put on your network. So we want to be ahead of that as much as possible if we can. But to the extent the network gets cracked and the data gets stolen, we want to have attorney-client privilege in place. And all the work that we're doing with Cyber ESI, the reports, the scanning, the vulnerability issues that we come across, all of that ends up being protected and not discoverable in a class action lawsuit. So we can put it in our privilege log and say, no, you don't get access to that. That was between me and my client. and you don't get to see it. So I think a lot of the effort has been put into trying to secure and defend networks, which almost becomes a non-ending task. And so it's all been kind of placed on the backs of the IT folks within the company's organization, and they're doing their best, and they take great pride in what they do, rightfully so. And a lot of those folks don't know what they don't know because the hackers are always ahead of them. And since they've never been in the hacking community, hacking into networks or trying to figure out a way to break a network, and they also don't have employees who fall for phishing exercises or other things that will make them network vulnerable, because it comes down most of the time to human error. Like whether it's a remote computer that everybody forgot about sitting in the corner of a room, or I think everyone will think about to the Target hacking incident where it came through an HVAC system, which somebody would think, like, how would it jump from the HVAC system into my actual corporate network? So those kinds of things, without the proper patches and things like that, we can't blame the IT folks for not knowing everything. These networks are very complicated, and most of the rural community has not just one or two networks, but 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 networks, because they're all coming from legacy networks onto the traditional switching networks onto the IP networks and beyond. And so we can't just say they're the ones responsible. We have to look at the company as a whole, from the CEO, the CFO, the entire C-suite, management, the board. Everybody needs to be involved in that. And that's where I see the companies falling down. I think they think it's something that IT folks do and that they don't have to get involved in it. And what we want to see more of is, like, where are your risk management people looking at all of this? Where are your CFOs, or the person within your company that's in the role of the CFO, if they're not even given the title of CFO, because these are small companies? Where is the CEO and sitting in and making sure things are going right? And where are you testing all of these processes and procedures? Your cyber incident response plan is great. You put it together. That's the first thing we do, is we work with our clients on getting that thing put together. But we don't want you to stuff it in a drawer and never revisit it. We want to exercise the cyber incident response plan on an annual basis and keep working it and figure out where we're weak and pay attention and monitor what's going on in our industry. I think NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, has something called CyberShare. It's a nice, intelligent way of getting information on the intelligence side on what's going on and what the latest threat possibilities are to the networks, and paying attention to that. Yeah, that would be on the IT folks, but also make sure that your employees are not vulnerable, because the phishing is getting more and more upscale, I guess. It's like you can see emails and you try to look at the emails. Is this a real email or not an email? And the biggest thing that I try to tell people is, if it feels like it's something, like you get something and you have to deal with it right away and it's an emergency, stop. Don't feel like it's an emergency. That's where they're usually trying to get you, is you feel like rushed and you have to get it done, or something bad is going to happen. That's usually the biggest clue right there, the biggest red flag. So I think getting more people involved and making it a whole company effort, and then educating your customers about cybersecurity and cybersecurity incidents and how your customers can behave with protecting their own data. Obviously, multi-factor authentication is a big role that plays into this. And then from an insurance standpoint, since I'm talking to an insurance company, I think I would say, please, please, please don't take the application forms lightly that you fill out with your insurance company. If you fill something out that's not correct, and then the insurance company sees it and they say, well, you said you had multi-factor authentication, I'll give that as an example, but you didn't. And you said you were doing this, but you're not. So don't just check the boxes to get the form in. Make sure you're checking the boxes accurately, and that you really know what you're doing. And I think that's where a lot of handoff takes place, is no one goes and checks with the risk management folks in the office the pencil pushers, the accountability folks aren't talking to the IT people about what actually they're doing with the networks. So it has to be a lot more communication. So if I had to boil it down to one word, it would be communications among everybody within the organization. First of all, I do a top to bottom review on what we already have in place. And then I'd look at how do I map forward to improving what we already have. And for each company, it's going to be different. And if I walked into a company as the new CEO, that would be the first thing I would look at is like, what do we already have in place? What is it that I need to protect? What is the data that's significant that somebody would be trying to go after? If I'm going to possibly be ransomed, what are they going to do to my network to freeze us up from being able to service our customers? I'd also make sure that my staff was taking lots of training, and I do a 360 on everybody and what they think their role is in cybersecurity and how they can prevent cybersecurity breaches, and what they, when they complain about like all the passwords and, and all that kind of thing, I'd be looking for things that would make it easier to not have to actually use passwords that you had to keep remembering and you forget and you're always resetting your password. So I'd probably look at like the biometric ways of doing things that would keep the network more secure. But while I was trying to build up the ability to buy things like that or do new things that were more secure, I'd just make sure I'd have lots of processes in place and that we were following the processes and we were testing the processes constantly. And that would be doing tabletop exercises, doing education with the staff, and making sure got everyone's buy-in, that it's all on all of our shoulders, not just our IT folks and not just our risk management folks, that everybody has a role to play in cybersecurity. And then I would try to work on my customers and making sure my customers understand that, hey, we haven't had an incident yet, but we're not perfect, and everybody gets hit with this stuff. But we want you to know that when we do get hit with it, we'll be coming to you and letting you know what we know when we know it, and not trying to hide behind our lawyers or our insurance policies and things like that. We want to make sure we keep your trust and that we do the right thing at the right time.